Hello, friends. I'm making this video to talk about the most regretful and shameful thing that I've ever had to talk about publicly. There's a video that's out that's a compilation of me saying the N-word.
So I've talked a lot about Joe Rogan lately on this channel, and I believe 2 videos ago about Joe Rogan, I said specifically, I know it's a lot, but it's very important because they're going after him, and they're using all the dirty same tricks that they use to go after anybody that they disagree with, or they have deemed a threat to the political establishment. In fact, I actually have a video that I shot, and it's not even edited at the time that we're talking, about H3H3's weird obsession about Joe Rogan and his physical appearance, but it just goes to show you how many things are breaking around this guy right at this very moment. However, unfortunately, one of the recent smear tactics that the media loves to utilize has worked against Joe Rogan, and Rogan has in fact apologized, which is the page 1, sentence 1 of the book of mistakes that you should never make in dealing with the left. But we have a sponsor that we have to talk about. We're going to go to the sponsor, and then I'll talk to you about the rest of this on the other side. Collagen powders are very popular among fitness influencers, and there's a reason for that. These people know that although collagen is one of the most abundant proteins in your body, when you start to run out of it, when you start to produce less of it, your skin starts breaking down. You start seeing those visible signs of aging. And I've started taking collagen in my morning inside my coffee to make sure that my skin gets itty bitty baby soft. And the collagen that I take, I get over at healthwithjustice.com. If you get over on this website, you will be able to get 51% off. It's pretty simple, pretty basic. A scoop a day keeps your skin itty bitty baby soft, just like mine. Don't you wish you had the softest skin in the world like I, literally softest skin in the world, do have? Healthwithjustice.com. So recently, when I talked about the Neil Young and then the other singers getting involved in the demanding of the censorship of Rogan on Spotify and basically threatening to pull their music off the platform if they didn't get rid of Joe Rogan, I talked about how Spotify's compliance, them putting warnings on Joe Rogan's podcast or on any podcast related to COVID, was the first step in a bunch of future steps towards censorship. And of course, while I wanted to be wrong, while the hopeful side of me said, you know what, it's just a warning label, even Joe Rogan's okay with it, the more experienced, knowledgeable side of me knew that it was just the beginning, knew that more was coming, and recently somebody dumped a N-word compilation from Joe Rogan's podcast, which has induced Spotify to remove about 70 episodes from the Joe Rogan library. It is shameful and ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous, but we're going to have to talk about it because Joe Rogan made mistake number 1, which was apologizing, and we're going to get into his video on that, and I'm going to explain why he definitely shouldn't have done that.
Hello, friends. I'm making this video to talk about the most regretful and shameful thing that I've ever had to talk about publicly. There's a video that's out that's a compilation of me saying the N-word. It's a video that's made of clips taken out of context of me of 12 years of conversations on my podcast, and it's all smushed together, and it looks fucking horrible, even to me.
So first and foremost, it is okay to feel bad about something that you did in the past. It is also okay, in general, to apologize about something that you did in the past. However, if somebody cuts together a compilation of all the different things that you said out of context in the way that you said it, in such a way to make it look like you were saying something that you wouldn't say, you should never apologize for their actions using video clips of you. They clearly did that in a deceptive way, and what Rogan should have done is put out whoever was sharing this information and tell people not to trust them because they're clearly sharing deceptive information. We've seen this tactic before as a means to gain censorship. Carlos Maza very famously cut together a bunch of different clips of Steven Crowder making fun of Carlos Maza and used that to push YouTube for censorship, and it ultimately ended up working, and right now, consistently, Steven Crowder is on the brink of being banned from YouTube based on the campaign launched by Maza against Crowder, claiming harassment. This is something very similar. It's something very shady, and people who are observant could have actually seen the prelude to this coming when you had people like Michael Eric Dyson talking about how Rogan and Jordan Peterson are angry white men basically setting the stage in the minds of their audience that this guy was a racist and we need to go after him for racism. So Rogan says that he learned, or he thought at the time, that using the N-word in context was acceptable, but now today he knows for sure it's never okay, despite any context, for a white person to use that word.
Now, I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now. I haven't said it in years, but for a long time, when I would bring that word up, like if it would come up in conversation, instead of saying the N-word, I would just say the word. I thought as long as it was in context, people would understand what I was doing. Like that context was part of the clip we were talking about Red Fox, how Red Fox said that word on television in the 1970s, and how times have changed so much since then.
I know Joe Rogan is well liked among people in my audience. I know he's well liked on the internet, and the mainstream media types are not well liked. However, Joe Rogan is just wrong here. Saying that it's not okay to use it in any context if you're a white person is just dumb. It's just non-thinking level logic, and that's what you would expect from somebody on the left. The idea that you can't use this word in its proper context is ridiculous. The idea that you can't quote somebody using this word is ridiculous. One of the things that bothers me to no end is when you have quotes in the media where it would actually be advantageous to the audience to communicate information for them to actually hear the word, yet they won't do it because they're so afraid of this new ridiculous standard where you can't use it even in context because bad people will cut that out of context and use it against you. That's exactly what happened to Joe Rogan right here, and he should not be apologizing for the actions of other people, especially when there was no ill will or hate in his heart.
I never used it to be racist because I'm not racist, but whenever you're in a situation where you have to say, I'm not racist, you fucked up. And I clearly have fucked up.
Again, here, totally disagree with Joe Rogan. If you have to say you're not racist, that doesn't mean you messed up. That typically means, in today's modern day and age, that somebody is wrongfully accusing you of racist, sometimes for political purposes. That is exactly what is happening to Joe Rogan in this instance. Again, it is the same playbook over and over again. Misinformation, disinformation, this guy is causing people to die. Oh, did I also mention that he's an evil white racist? Look at him, he's white, and he said the N-word. Forget about the context, don't worry about that. So therefore, he's a racist, we gotta get him. Evil white racist, Joe Rogan white racist, Joe Rogan racist, Joe Rogan racist.
That context was part of the clip we were talking about Red Fox, how Red Fox said that word on television in the 1970s, and how times have changed so much since then. Or about how Richard Pryor used it as one of the titles of one of his albums. Or I was quoting a Lenny Bruce bit, or I was quoting a Paul Mooney bit, or I was talking about how Quentin Tarantino used it repeatedly in Pulp Fiction. Or I was talking about how a Netflix executive, ironically, used it because he was trying to compare it to another offensive word, and he said it out loud, and they fired him. Not calling anybody or just saying the word out loud. I was also talking about how there's not another word like it in the entire English language, because it's a word where only one group of people is allowed to use it, and they can use it in so many different ways. Like if a white person says that word, it's racist and toxic, but a black person can use it, and it could be a punchline, it could be a term of endearment, it could be lyrics to a rap song, it could be a positive affirmation. It's a very unusual word, but it's not my word to use. I'm well aware of that now, but for years I used it in that manner.
This probably actually bothers me more than Rogan's overall apology. As I've said multiple different times on this channel, there is a mistake in the media, and it's purposely made on the left-wing side, but I think it's made out of he's not hating us on the right-wing side, that Joe Rogan is some type of conservative, that Joe Rogan is anything other than somebody on the left. Remember, Rogan was somebody who loved Bernie Sanders. He was somebody who supported Bernie Sanders. Maybe he draws the line at the woke and social justice stuff. However, Bernie Sanders is woke, and he does push social justice and all these racial things as well, by the way, and he always has, for those of you who get that twisted. But overall, Joe Rogan considers himself a left-wing person. He stated multiple different times that he's never voted Republican in his entire life. So the idea that Joe Rogan would take this in any way that wasn't the way that a left-winger would take it is actually not surprising to me. But what bothers me is that Rogan is acknowledging in this video clip very specifically that deliberately his words were taken out of context in such a way so that people could smear him, and yet he's still apologizing anyway. So he's explaining why the smears are wrong, why they're inaccurate, but he's giving too much ground in his apology for these smears. Again, if you cut me out of context specifically to make it appear that I said something that I did not say, I will not apologize for it. I will go after you. I will find the person who published this first, and I will target them directly. That's what Joe Rogan should be doing. I won't do this half measure where I say, listen, everything I said in its appropriate context was perfectly fine. Everything that I said, and here are different instances of context, makes sense and is not offensive in any way. However, because this scumbag, because this hatchet man ended up cutting me out of context, you might have been offended by that. Therefore, I'm going to apologize to you for your inappropriate assessment of lacking of context, because I want you to feel better in such a way. And also, I'm going to say that even in context, it's never appropriate to say this term. That's never going to happen for me. I'm never going to give that information out. I'm never going to apologize in that way, and Joe Rogan shouldn't do that, and it bothers me so much that he knows for a fact that what happened to him was wrong, that he would be the victim in this scenario, and yet he is giving up that status to apologize to imaginary people who are not offended, and even those people who are offended because somebody deliberately designed a piece of propaganda to make them angry at Joe Rogan for their political gain. And by the way, this 100% worked in every possible way beyond Joe Rogan apologizing. So as I said in my previous Spotify video, and everybody was like, listen, Rogan's okay with it, no big deal, whatever, this would only be the first step. The labeling and all that, the giving into the left, was only going to be page 1 in the chapter of censorship of Joe Rogan. And apparently, in response to this, they've removed about 70 Rogan podcasts from their show library, which is ridiculous, and they did so because these episodes allegedly contain some no-no words, so now we don't have access to these great conversations because the censors won.
And that's my intention to express myself in this video, to say there's nothing I can do to take that back. I wish I could. Obviously, that's not possible. I do hope that, if anything, that this can be a teachable moment. Because I never thought it would ever be taken out of context and put in a video like that. And now that it is, holy shit, it looks bad. And it's part of also me doing this podcast for thousands of hours, thousands of episodes, over 12 years. I said a lot of fucking stupid shit, which is fine when you're talking about most things, but not when you're talking about race.
The only thing that is a teachable moment about what we're observing right now is the fact that it follows a long pattern in history, not just American history, of trying to destroy the past because people in the future think they're far more virtuous than those in the past, when in reality, they have the same problems, the same human nature, the same negative inclinations, and their desire to destroy that is really a reflection of their desire to destroy problems within their own past. Everybody who's jumping on Joe Rogan has used the N-word in very similar contexts of Joe Rogan, very benign context, and a lot of them have used it in much less benign context than Joe Rogan. A lot of them have leaned into it. We've very famously seen somebody like H3H3 in this clip that always pops up talking to iDubbbz using the N-word with the F slur for gay people on his show because iDubbbz says it's okay to do so, and H3 is leaning into it and smiling. Now, a lot of people use that as a mechanism to get H3 to apologize, but I don't think Ethan should apologize for that. On top of that, there's a video circulating of TYT using the N-word in various news-related contexts, similar to Joe Rogan, and people are saying, what hypocrites, they shouldn't be doing that, and to the extent that TYT has criticized Rogan for his use of the N-word in the past, obviously that is good to point out hypocrisy. However, I don't want people to go after the Young Turks based on them using it in an appropriate context. It's one thing for you to call somebody the N-word in a mean way when they are black to be racist to them, but none of these people in none of these circumstances were doing so, and they should not apologize, and nobody should be held up to the standard, and everybody should be advocating for what they advocated 10 years ago when they said, hey, look, in context, it matters. You can be offended, but your offense is not going to subordinate me and my language, especially when I'm covering things that actually happen in the news. The N-word isn't a magic word. It's not a word that, devoid of context, is inherently offensive. And we know that because black people use the N-word to describe each other all the time in non-offensive ways. I've said it before and I'll say it again because it needs to be stated repeatedly. The people on the left that are demanding these new standards be enforced retroactively are not people you can compromise with. They are extremists. They want control over you. They're demanding your compliance, and you can't meet them halfway. They're just going to push more and more in the direction that they want to push it. It has become so normalized in this nation, these calls for censorship, that Jen Psaki recently, and we already talked about the Surgeon General doing it, talked about how Spotify needs to do more to stifle people like Joe Rogan.
Last week, the Surgeon General also was asked on MSNBC about Joe Rogan's vaccine comments on Spotify, and he said that tech companies have an important role to play in stopping misinformation because they are the predominant places where misinformation spreads. Does the White House and the administration think this is a satisfactory step?
Our hope is that all major tech platforms and all major news sources, for that matter, be responsible and be vigilant to ensure the American people have access to accurate information on something as significant as COVID-19. That certainly includes Spotify. So this disclaimer, it's a positive step, but we want every platform to continue doing more to call out mis and disinformation while also uplifting accurate information. It's a positive step, but there's more that can be done.
The fact that this has become so normalized in our country that government officials could be asked directly about people and if they're in favor of their censorship, and they respond with their actual opinion that they are in favor of their censorship, shows how far we've gone as a country. It shows how much of the pocket has been pushed by these extremists on the left, and we should not be giving any more ground to them in any way. Even if you legitimately feel like you should apologize for specific things, you either make your apology to that specific thing to a specific person that you may or may not have offended, and you don't go any further, because any inch is just a mile that they're gaining inch by inch.
And there's another clip that I have to address. There's a clip from 11 years ago. I was telling a story on the podcast about how me and my friend Tommy and his girlfriend, we got really high. We were in Philadelphia, and we went to go see Planet of the Apes. And we didn't know where we were going. We just got dropped off by a cab, and we got dropped off in this all-black neighborhood.
Look, I would be dishonest if I didn't tell you that there was something in there that Joe Rogan talked about that I can actually understand his reaction to. And this is his reference to seeing Planet of the Apes in a black neighborhood. And even though the story of watching that movie in a black neighborhood ultimately ends up with them having a great time, there was a point in time where they were joking about it, that they may have crossed a line into racialized humor territory, where they talked about the black neighborhood as if it was like being on the Planet of the Apes.
And I was trying to make the story entertaining, and I said we got out, and it was like we were in Africa. It's like we were in Planet of the Apes. I did not, nor would I ever say that black people are apes, but it sure fucking sounded like that. And I immediately afterwards said, that's a racist thing to say. Planet of the Apes wasn't even in Africa. I was just saying there's a lot of black people there.
Now, very crucially, Joe Rogan, who is a comedian who makes jokes and makes jokes that push up against the line all the time, actually stated clearly that he felt badly for these comments at the time, and that's why at the time he removed this podcast episode, because he didn't want that out there, and this clip was added into this compilation, and this is something that he's acknowledged problems with in the past, and thus is not retroactively apologizing for. So I do want to acknowledge that that exists, and this would be that narrow thing that Rogan should apologize for, because within context at the time, Rogan felt very bad about it, and even though the story had a good ending, he didn't like the way that he came off, he didn't like the way this episode came off, so therefore he removed it himself without any pressure from outside sources. Now, somebody got the clip, obviously it came in this smear compilation and all that, but it is fair of Rogan to say, hey, look, this is a different scenario. This is not something that I'm apologizing for recently. This is some humor that crossed the line, and I felt it crossed the line at the time, and he's not complying with new standards by saying, yes, I took this down, and I took this down years ago.
But then I went on to talk about what a positive experience it was and how much fun it was to go to see this movie in a black neighborhood. It wasn't a racist story, but it sounded terrible And like I said, you can have clunky stories about anything, but not about race. And so I deleted that whole podcast, but obviously somebody made a clip out of it and taken out of context. It looks terrible, but it looks terrible even in context. It's a fucking idiotic thing to say. And I was just trying to be entertaining. I certainly wasn't trying to be racist.
And he doesn't want this lumped in with all this compilation of other stuff that was based on him having standards back then that he no longer has today. But I just can't stand overall retroactively apologizing for something that was broadly acceptable, that doesn't harm anybody to this day, and that the standards changing actually don't make sense, because you end up catering to people who are just naturally offended by everything, and you create a situation wherever we're reporting about supposedly racist language where reporters are asked to be less accurate in communicating what was actually said or done in a given situation, as long as it surrounds this no-no word. Look, I do understand that this is a sensitive subject. This is a sensitive subject specifically for Black Americans in the United States of America, and a lot of people could feel similar to how Rogan feels now and don't have a problem with him issuing this apology. So I will leave the floor open to any of you who want to convince me that this wasn't a mistake, or to convince me that absent context, if you're not a Black person, the N-word is totally inappropriate in all scenarios, even when you're quoting something, or you're singing along to a song, or something similar. I don't agree with that. I'm never going to agree with that, but I do want to hear arguments, because who knows? Never say never. You might be able to change my mind. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, you show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social media, support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking about Joe Rogan giving in. Like we said before, Spotify giving in was just the first step. Till next time.